his academic credentials. After St. Xavier's, he went to NUS to do his master's in economics, beyond which he joined Barclays. Like me, I also joined Barclays in the year 2008, but I God had a separate plan. I came out of the corporate. Barclays was my only experience, and it was a wonderful one. It speaks volumes that Rahul is actually with them for the last 13 odd years, isn't it, Rahul? So
Yeah, it's
Barclays,
my 15th year now started. So,
yeah,
uh,
internship and then the job,
correct.
everything
Yeah.
at Barclays. Yeah. So, so yeah, it's been an amazing journey. And Rahul has been associated with INSEAD, NUS, business, schools, prominent institutions of India. And he chose to come back to India. 2019, he chose to come back to India, live in Mumbai. Currently, he is in Delhi attending, conferences, meetings. Yet he was able to find out the time to do a session with us. Thank you so much, Rahul, for doing this. The students, often ask me that, what is the relevancy of the
Mm.
models that we do in the college? Do we, use it in the corporate? What is the, masters and, job connection in terms of the studies and, the work of an, economist like you are? So, what are the models that you, use on a regular or a day-to-day basis? Can you just touch up on that?
Sure. So I'd say, my as Samkith, you were saying that my background was in, my microeconometrics, right? I mean, looking at
Right.
more on issues around, volatility and variance. And so I used to, like, for my uh, thesis, we didn't have a big
Yeah.
thesis in NUS, but it was like a project that, and I did quite poorly on it. Actually, I remember they were very unhappy with the project. Uh, but but
Okay.
uh, it was more on, very high frequency trading data, that was kind of designed on that. And
Yeah.
but my job in a way required me to be a macroeconomist, right? So it's a very big
Right.
I mean, may not sound like a big shift, but it was, at that point, it was a big shift. But
Yeah.
what helped me was the just general understanding of correlation, causality, right? I mean, and
Hmm.
understanding what, how to, um, like, I would say one of the most important things, and this is something that a lot of people. So one thing I always tell, like, when
Hmm.
I go recruiting, or I meet young kids who are interested in banking, is that this is not a think tank job. This is not an academia job like what I do. I don't have the
It's very
luxury of
hands-on,
time.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I don't have the luxury of time to sit on a paper for 2 years and, कोई
Correct.
peer review करके भेजेगा 2 साल के बाद,
Right.
and then वो publish होगा. By that time, it gets
It's
lost.
not relevant. Yeah.
I mean, I won't. Maybe it is right, but the probability of its relevance for anything that takes 2-3 years is low, right? At
Yeah.
least it might be within like a small group of peers, because that typically is what I think tends to happen, is that, a lot of academic work tends to be, it's useful, but it tends to be useful over a long period of time. Whereas for
You're right.
me, and my role, it tends to be very quick, and so it's almost like the lowest common denominator of analysis in some sense, but it tends to be very market focused, right? Not necessarily always with the idea that, oh, this is something that can move markets all the time. But as I said, like, the one reason why we got really worked up about COVID very early on in January
Hmm.
2020 itself was
Hmm.
not because we felt that this is, about to go completely bonkers globally,
Yeah.
but because we said, okay, there is actually CNY coming up in a week's time. Now, if you just run a normal shock say if you run a dummy variable to say, okay, is there a shock coming about? The reason why it becomes important is not, if we were to just extrapolate based on the last two or three such similar
Hmm.
instances, say whether you look at
Events. Hmm.
what happened with Ebola, what happened with MERS, what happened with um, H1N1, what happened with even SARS for that matter.
Hmm.
The logic was to say that maybe it doesn't matter, right? That we will be able to control it. But the reason why we got really worked up was because we felt that it was uh, at a time when the mobility in the country would be rising very materially, and so it naturally kind of made us a little bit more cautious. And that is not because we were running a model; it was just we were sort of looking at our calendar, saying why
Yeah.
should we be worried? So a lot of times it's just very simple, lateral thinking, ability to sort of think through in a very straightforward manner, right? Not to overcomplicate it. I mean, we do use
Yeah.
models.
Hmm.
It's not to say we don't run. So, every now and then I'll run a var, or we'll try and do a error correction model, or, we'll run. But those are mostly to see, say, the extent of the relation. And
Yeah.
again, like one of the things about statistics in any country, right? So country level
Hmm.
statistics is that they tend to already have fixed weights. So it's not like you are estimating everything from scratch. And
Yeah.
it just is for the impact rather than the, like, there's certain types of correlation or causation which are reasonably well established, right? Which you can see
Hmm.
from charts, etc. So we tend to focus a little bit more on showing a story rather than necessarily running a complex model to show कि अरे ये काम करेगा. So even
Hmm.
at times you're doing, say, certain types of forecasting, like say
Right.
inflation forecasting. uh, I don't know how many of your students have looked through the data for India, but for India almost 50-60% of the month on month variation can be explained by three vegetable prices: tomato, potato, onions.
Wow.
So if you are just looking at that month on month price change, ki is मैंने on average these three vegetables are 20 rupees a kilo. Next month it is 22-25 rupees a kilo.
Hmm.
Obviously their weights are smaller, so the contribution tends to be less, but it still
But it's an
helps you
estimate.
directionally. It's a directional thing, right? That if these
Right.
three are going up, the probability of the CPI index going up is very high.
Very high.
So even though the total weight of these three components will be less than 3% in the
Right.
CPI basket, right? So it just comes down to understanding what are these drivers of data, right? And that's what we are ultimately trying to predict.
Hmm. Right. So it's basically a mix of logic and the models that you know already, and then find out a causality or a correlation between them to showcase your result. Yeah, I
Yeah.
get that. Yeah. So yeah, so that's interesting. We've actually seen in the last 4 to 5 years is that there is an explosion of economic institutions across the country. So IIT Delhi, Roorkee, Guwahati, IFT, Ashoka, SNU. There are a plethora of good places doing a master's in economics currently. Like if you remember, in our time there were only basically three options that we
Correct.
thought about: ISI, DSE, JNU. IGIDR was
Correct.
also new in our
Yeah,
time, so
not very popular at that
not
point. Yeah.
very well known. Correct. So
Hmm.
any particular reason why you see that the demand for economists have actually gone up? Any particular reason, or will you like to find out a correlation between that and the world today? That do we need more economists today?
I think, I mean, definitely one can see that the demand for people with a solid background in economics has increased, because it's not just for, say, purely. I think, like within our batch, right? Xavier's,
Hmm.
whatever, we
Yeah.
had some 70 people in the batch, or
Uh-huh.
yeah, I mean, how many, 5 or 6 people actually became economists, I think. Like I can literally count them on fingertips, so, but I think outside of the pure markets or the pure academia
Hmm.
folks, right, there is a lot of that big um, demand for people who effectively, I think it's a whole logical thinking aspect, right, that you are able to
Hmm.
sort of think logically. Economics may, whether it's like a bachelor's from a good university or a master's degree, it's not easy, right? I mean, the amount of maths and statistical knowledge that you need in order to cope up with the coursework is quite a lot. So
Right.
it sort of attracts people who enjoy, I think, that balance between logical thinking and mathematics, and it almost
Hmm.
gives you a bit of ability to think in sort of mathematical terms, right? I mean, so like one of the key questions I ask whenever I walk into an interview, say with a young person, is just to give me examples of what is a stock of, like a macro statistic, which is a stock, and a
Right.
macro statistic, which is a flow.
Flow.
It's a very simple question, but you'd be surprised how many people actually don't get it. So a lot of times it just kind of comes down to those basic traits of, are you able to sort of understand numbers inherently,
Hmm.
uh,
Hmm.
and that, I think, is what kind of makes studying economics quite fascinating. So I don't know how many of your like, if you have not seen it on the RBI's website. So RBI write its own history. They actually prepare their own history,
Right.
officially documented history of the central bank. But
Hmm.
those are like crazy thick books. Like there are 4 volumes all put together. I think some 7-8 thousand pages,
Wow.
maybe.
You need to
No,
simplify it, right?
I didn't read all 7-8 thousand pages. It would have been insane for me to do that. But I did read quite a bit. And when I first started reading it, I mean, it was not done with the idea of doing a book, but it was
Right.
like, okay, let's just learn. And especially, I generally feel that we tend to uh, not know what our immediate economic history has been, right? So between,
Right.
say, from the 1900s to now, there is stuff written about it, but it is not being written from the perspective of the economic side, or institution building side. How do these institutions come about? And that was partly the motivation, to sort of write about how the institution got built. Um, and I checked with a couple of ex RBI, governors, deputy governors, whether they would like to, you know, they think it's a good idea to do this, and they said, yeah, it sounds
Hmm.
like a good project. So then I started working. I mean, mostly working on weekends, or on late, like after coming back from work. You tend to write a little bit, but it took me about 2.5 years to finish the book, and then
That
it
is
came out.
commendable. You
Yeah,
were at
it
it.
just came out in 2018 October.
Right.
But it's a very fascinating period, because RBI has its own, it's one of the few institutions, I think, in the country which are kind of like Caesar's wife, above all suspicion in a way. And I wouldn't say, like, they have had a stellar track record of
Yeah.
making the right decision every time, but then within the spectrum of institutions we have, RBI has done reasonably quite well in steering the country. So it turned out to be a very useful project for me, because I learned a lot from the just reading up on the history of that particular period. Economic history is very important, because you need to understand how, why the country is in the shape it is, and what
Hmm.
mistakes did we make in the last 70 years, that kind of brings us to the situation we are in. uh, I mean, so it kind of was, that was partly the motivation to also then do it, so that you write about the periods where the information set, at least in a contemporary sense, right? I mean, something
Correct.
that is easily accessible. But nobody actually reads these big fat RBI history books, right? I mean, There are only a few idiots who'll actually sit down and read it. But it kind of comes down to putting these things in a contemporary setting, which is easily accessible, and then it kind of triggers, the interest to know more
Right.
about how things were. So that was kind of the motivation, and I think that objective was somewhat achieved as well. Like, at least from my own perspective, I learned a lot.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah. That's great. Will you also like to, share about the, new book that you're, working on currently and
Sure. So yeah, I mean, I'm currently working on my second book, which is the biography of a gentleman called C.D. Deshmukh. So Ankit, you'll know that name simply because
yeah,
ISI made, there is a
yeah, and
Deshmukh Bhavan, right? I
NSSO.
mean,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, and he was also the president of ISI for over almost 20 years, I think, 43 to
He was.
64, if I remember correctly.
Hmm.
But he also was a finance minister, set up the planning commission, uh, was the first Indian governor of the RBI. So the first two governors of RBI were, first guy was Australian, the second guy was
Yeah,
British, and
British.
so Deshmukh was the first Indian governor. And he set up a lot of institutions. I mean, NCAER, ICRIER. He set up UGC. He was very heavily involved with the
Hmm.
National Book Trust. He almost was offered the chairmanship of managing directorship of IMF. So quite a fascinating character.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
didn't know anything about him. Again, like there seems to be a lot of emphasis on the political side of it, but we don't talk about the people who are managing the economic side. So I learned about him when I was researching my first book. So
Hmm.
when I came to the end, I said, okay, I'll write his biography. So that is project is coming along, and hopefully the book will be out sometime end of this year.
Wow. Wow, that's great. I hope that you like the session and learned a lot out of it.